Hi, this Foundations of Yoga lesson is all about Paschimottanasana, or your seated forward fold. As you may recognize, if you've tried your seated forward fold in class, usually it is brought into a class a little bit later after we're warmed up, especially through the glutes and the hips and the hamstrings, as the Paschimottanasana is really intense on the backside of the body. So as we deepen into that fold, it does work on strengthening and lengthening through the backside of the body, through the glutes, the hamstrings. You'll feel it into your calves, all the way along the backside of your legs. And so that's what you'll be feeling physically when you're in your seated forward fold. But mentally, you'll find that this practice is great for reducing anxiety and bringing calm into the mind. So it's really nice to practice, especially before bedtime, and just to wind down and relax. So instead of starting with the feet up approach as we have in all of these yoga foundation classes, this time we're going to start with the pelvis because we are sitting on our butt. So we'll talk about what your pelvis should be doing in your seated forward fold. So just taking a seat on my mat here and thinking about my pelvis, generally you'll start in staff pose, so sitting up nice and tall. Crown of the head is nice and tall and the spine is nice and straight. You'll usually inhale the arms up and then start to fold. The fold, when we're in our seated forward fold, should come from the hip and not so much from the back, right? We want to keep the fold coming right here with our hips, and our sit bones should have the weight balanced evenly on the mat so that we can start to fold forward ever so slightly. And we'll get into the back here in a moment. But just for now, we just concentrate on that fold starting right here at the hips. And the other way to think about it when you are starting your seated forward fold is you want to think of the pelvis as having that anterior pelvic tilt. You might hear that term thrown around a lot in your yoga classes. And for me, I need something more visual. So an anterior pelvic tilt is really like if you took a soup bowl and just imagine yourself tilting the bowl and pouring some of the soup out of it. So if your pelvic bowl, think of it as just a bowl itself, that you're trying to tilt that forward and keep that tilt going forward until you really can't tilt anymore. So now we're moving from the hips and the pelvis into the torso and thinking about what that part of the body is doing as we're doing our seated forward fold. So from the hips, we're tilting that pelvis, we're leaning forward, we're keeping the spine straight. That is usually what is cued in class. Now there are usually two different camps or trains of thought when it comes to yoga. One is to keep the spine nice and straight as possible, and only stopping when you feel like you're forced to start to round or you feel like the back is starting to round as you come forward. And the other is to keep it straight and then allow yourself to round and to fold into your seated forward fold and just to relax. Now, it really depends on what type of class you're doing and what stage of the class you're in as well, as far as what your yoga teacher will be cueing. And then take it upon yourself to do what you need in your own body. If you are looking to really strengthen and lengthen the backside of your body, then by all means, you should emphasize keeping the back straight, because the straighter your spine is, and keeping that straightness and then trying to keep the compression from the chest towards the top of the thighs, or you're trying to reach these lower ribs towards the top of the thighs, that will very much emphasize the stretch into the calves and also into the backs of these hamstrings. So you need to find where you're at, and you can certainly pause at any height or round. Or if you're able to keep your spine nice and straight, you can come quite low. So again, listen to your teacher. Maybe take a look at what you see in a mirror or record yourself on the phone to see how straight you can keep your spine as you lower into your forward fold. And you can make adjustments from there based on what your body needs. Legs. Now, you can have your knees bent in your seated forward fold. And that is a great place to start. As a matter of fact, that's more of a caterpillar stretch, and you can allow yourself to come forward, keeping the spine straight, or again, just rounding and relaxing into it as well. As you progress, you may want to start to walk the sit bones back, straightening out the legs somewhat, keeping a slight bend in the knees, and coming forward. Just know that when you have a bend in the knees, it will make it easier for you. You can keep the back straighter and have the knees bent at the same time. If they're both straight, that will be moving into the full expression of the pose and will be a challenge for most, especially if the body is not warm or acclimated into the forward fold. One other thing with your legs when you are in your seated forward fold, whether your knees are bent or not, just make sure that the knees are pointed straight up and that they aren't rolling out to the sides. Now for your arms and shoulders when you're in your forward fold, as you start to fold and lower down, you can have many different placements of the hands and the arms. They can just rest alongside the shin. They can take a hold of the shins, maybe take a hold of the outside of the feet or the big toes. Really exaggerate the length in the spine when you grab a hold of the big toes. And then some props you can use are a strap. It's a great place to start. Just have it across the bottoms of the feet. And then just take a good grip on that strap and start to lower down, thinking about that pelvic tilt and keeping the back straight. This will really work on that lengthening through the back side of the body. If you have progressed fairly deeply into your seated forward fold, you can also grab a block and make that extension even further and wrap your hands around the bottom of the block. Again, find what works for you. But just remember that as you move forward and into your seated forward fold, try not to have the shoulders up by the ears. As with all of our yoga postures, we want to have the shoulders down and keep the neck nice and long and keep the shoulder blades down and wide across the back. Now we've made it into the feet. Now the feet are still active in your seated forward fold. And when you are in this posture, if the legs are fully extended, your feet should be flexed and they should be very strong in this pose. One thing to remember, whether you are taking a hold of the feet or maybe your hands are just alongside the legs, as you flex the feet, you're generally a little stronger in the big toe area and that part of the foot will flex back further. But try to concentrate on also pulling back on the pinky toe side of the foot as well, so you keep a nice strong flex through the entire foot. That's one time I do have the range in my forward fold to use a block, and that's one thing I really like about the block is that my feet can press right against it like it's a little tiny wall, and it brings all corners of the foot back and towards my body. Finally, as you fold down into your seated forward fold, thinking about the head and the neck, we just want to be nice and neutral in the neck so that we aren't straining and we don't feel the muscles in our head and neck start to tense. You can just allow it to drape down, looking down in between the legs, and usually it's a good tendency to allow the eyes to close as this is a very calming posture. Now, as we already discussed, there are several modifications that you can take and you should take if you need them when you're in your seated forward fold. You can use the strap, as we discussed, extending the feet out long, taking the strap to the bottom of the feet, and then just using the strap while you keep the back nice and straight and start to tilt forward. Also, some people do find difficulty with just sitting in this posture, and so it helps to be a little bit higher. You can either take a blanket and roll it up so that it's nice and firm and doesn't slide out from underneath you, or you can sit up higher on a block, and from there, use your hands to help balance and steady you as you lean forward. And that can assist you in that anterior pelvic tilt, or just tilting that soup bowl forward and leaning forward. My favorite place to start with a seated forward fold is having the bent knees and just doing a fold or two with bent knees. You can have your feet flat on the mat, or you can also have them up and flexed as well. And the legs can be spread just a little bit wider to make some room for the chest to come forward and tilt forward. As you get more comfortable with that, start to walk the sit bones back slightly, taking some of that bend out of the knees. You can still have a little bend there, and then just see how much lower you can go as you scoot your butt a little further away from the feet. Now, if you are pregnant, you probably need a little bit more space as you come forward. So you'll need to take the feet a little wider, probably not as wide as the mat, but just wider than hip distance. And then also that bent knee posture will assist you. And you can use the hands and drape them over the top of the legs as you just try to lean forward. And it might feel really nice just to round in that when the knees are bent, because you have a nice little support here as well. Again, it's all what you're looking for in your forward fold. If you want to make it more relaxing, round and just release into it. If you want to really get a stretch and focus on that back body, then keep the spine straight. You can always take your seated forward fold to a chair, which is useful for your practice during maybe your office break for the day. But just make sure to straighten the legs, maybe a little slight micro bend in the knee, and you can have the feet flexed and start to bend forward. Just make sure that you're in a surface where you won't slide and that your chair won't roll away on you.